All this week, we're having a good time talking about Chicago summer festivals. And you know what goes great with a hot day at a local festival? A great cold local beer. That's why I'm putting you on Revolution Brewing's new Cold Time Lager. Brewed low and slow with that Lake Michigan water, Cold Time is easy drinking. Perfect for festivals, block parties, and all things summertime shy. I usually got a couple tucked with me on the kayak. Find it and other Revolution Brewing beers at your favorite festival, neighborhood bar, or on shelves across the city. Check out the latest at revbrew.com. Today on CityCast Chicago. All week long, we're talking about some of our favorite summer festivals across the city. But have you ever stopped and wondered just how much goes into making these block, neighborhood, and citywide festivals work? And how much do communities actually benefit? We talk with someone who runs these events for the city to learn why and how Chicago has so many damn things. And is $10 suggested donation really enough to put them all on? It's Tuesday, June 11th. I'm Jacoby Cochran, and this is what Chicago's talking about. Our festival coverage this week is sponsored by Revolution Brewing, and to learn about the economics of Summerfest season, we turn to Chicago's Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events, aka DCASE. DCASE puts on some of Summertime Shy best known events like the Taste, but they're also the department that issues the permits for your favorite street festivals. Neil Heights is the director of event production for DCASE. Neil, welcome to CityCast Chicago.
Good morning, Jacoby. Thanks so much for having me. It's an absolute honor to be on CityCast talking about my favorite thing. Summertime Shy is certainly one of my favorite things to talk about. So thanks so much for having me.
I love to hear that because, again, for me, I get to just enjoy street festivals, block parties, being outside. And I imagine you get to as well, but you also have the stress of trying to make sure that these events run smoothly for organizers, for the city, for people like myself who are there having a good time. Yeah, last year, DCASE issued nearly 600 special events permits. Not all of those were Summer Street Fest. So can you tell us roughly how many festivals happen in Chicago, say, between May and September?
I mean, certainly looking at the number, the 600 number is a really good starting point, right? So any event that is that either shuts down a street or has a stage or serving alcohol needs to fill out a special event permit application. So the good thing is we're able to very closely track how many of those events are taking place in and around the city. I mean, 600 permits are issued just through the city, not including the Park District. So, I mean, you're certainly getting very close to that 1,000 number of events that just take place in and around Chicago. Again, with only, when you think about 90 days of summer and you're looking at 1,000 events.
I actually want to do that math real quick. 90. Well, let's see that.
Although I probably should count September as summer, right? September has become the new summer in Chicago. We traditionally think of Labor Day as the cap on it, but the real reality is our summertime fun pushes all the way through September. So, if you think of May through September, talking about 120 days.
That's almost 8 events a day.
8 events per day, and that seems even low, right? I mean, there are days, because the number of events that are taking place on Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday are probably pretty low, right? So if we're really looking at Thursday, Friday, Saturday, Sunday as potential event dates, you're talking 16 to 20 at that point, right?
Yeah.
When we divide it out. So again, the calendar is full of fun and awesome events, and that's just Chicago.
Obviously, when I think about Chicago just in general, I see all of our advantages, our cultural diversity, the fact that we have so many different neighborhoods. Throughout your time working with DCASE, how have you seen just the number of festivals grow and shift and change? And what are some of those big advantages that Chicago has?
Yeah, I mean, I think that you're absolutely right. Chicago lends itself to being a festival town, right? Special events and festivals are what we're made of. I mean, really, when you think about it too, Jacoby, right? Like, one of the stars on the Chicago flag is The Columbian Exposition, the World's Fair, was an event, right? A major event. And so I think it's just already in our ethos, already in our blood that we're going to have a good time. Chicago's been partying for a long time. And I think that there are a few reasons for that, right? Number one, our weather. We're inside for a good 8 months, right? So when it's time to go, it's go time in Chicago. And that's been forever. And I think to your point too, right? Like the diversity of our city lends itself to some really awesome events that people want to showcase their diversity. People want to gather together to celebrate their diversity. And so because of that, there's so much to celebrate. I think the other reason too is that our neighborhoods are distinct, right? Every neighborhood has something about that neighborhood that makes it itself. And not to mention the people who live there have a lot of pride for their neighborhoods, right? You talk about the 77 Chicago neighborhoods, and there's pride that exists within those neighborhoods. So all of those factors together make for a lot of really good reasons why people want to have a good time. People want to celebrate that. They want to have a festival. They want to have an event that showcases all of those things. And then, we want to get outside and enjoy the good weather while it lasts.
Do you have a sense of what is the oldest neighborhood festival, or what is one of the oldest neighborhood festivals still running?
While I probably don't have the exact answer, Jacoby, I do want to, put out there, right? I mean, the Bud Billiken Parade has been going on since 1929, right?
Yes.
So, I mean, you look at some of these old, iconic traditions that Chicago has. I mean, you can make the case that Maxwell Street Market was a party, right, in its own right. And we're talking about Maxwell Street since 1912. You look at, the Air and Water Show from 1959, and then you start pushing forward, right? And you start looking at all of the different celebrations that have taken place. The Puerto Rican Festival in Humboldt Park is a really good example of something that's been around for a long time.
Yeah, I think this is 46 years they just celebrated.
Absolutely. You look at Andersonville Midsummer Fest. I mean, they're in their 58th year. I mean, or the other one too that I was thinking about, Jacoby, was the 57th Street Art Fair. That one's been existing in Hyde Park for years and years and years, right? I mean, that's an incredibly iconic event. North Halsted Market Days, Taste of Randolph. I mean, these neighborhood events have been around for a really long time, celebrating, all of the things that are unique to that particular area and to the people who live there. So, even when you look at just the festival landscape in Chicago, there is no shortage of tradition and longevity in a lot of these events that we produce in the city.
You mentioned a couple of important criteria where you start looking at special events permits. You mentioned serving alcohol, shutting down the street, having a stage. At what point does an event go from a neighborhood block party to a street festival to, a full-on big ticketed music festival?
Yeah, so I think, as we watch events grow, it's so awesome to see, right? What may just be, like you said, a block party that requires the street closure can then quickly grow into this opportunity for a stage and music, right? And once the stage reaches a certain point, right, once it's more than, I think, 24 inches off the ground, that becomes a stage that requires a permit. And I think once you start serving alcohol legally, that also requires a permit. And so looking at those parameters, you start to look at around like 2,000. Once 2,000 people are attending a particular event, I think you qualify for the real deal by that point.
I mean, there are a few ways we can measure impact. Like, we understand what they mean for neighborhoods, how hard communities, organizations, chambers of commerce fight to keep events going. And there are a number of ways to also look at the economic impact. First, do Street Fest generate revenue for the department or the city itself through permits, taxes, whatever the case is?
Yeah, I think that the economic impact is incredibly important for an event, right? An event can be successful in its own right? Like, did they get X number of donations at the door? Did they sell X amount of beverage? What makes the festival successful? Did positive media impact, right? That sort of thing. But then
exactly,
the surrounding community needs to share in that. They need to see what is the benefit for that community, because an event, in all honesty, an event does put a strain and can put a strain on a community through street closures, increased traffic, that sort of thing, right? And so
lack of park access.
Yeah, for sure, right? So what's the upshot? What is the economic impact? Are people spending money when they come to that community and local businesses? Are local businesses being featured in that event? How is the event really working to not only support itself, but then support the community in which it exists in?
How do we track that? And we know some are more closely related to the neighborhood, put on by affiliates in the neighborhood. We understand some may be brought to a neighborhood by private interests. And so that dynamic between the relationship between the event, the street fest, the music fest, and the community definitely differs case by case. But how are we tracking the overall impact a particular event has on a neighborhood?
Certainly for the downtown festivals, right? You start to look at hotel occupancy. You start to look at what those rates are at the hotels. Are we bringing in tourism, right? And I mean, Choose Chicago does a really good job of tracking our tourism numbers here in Chicago, and I think that's a starting point. The culinary, the hospitality community is an easy second in terms of our restaurants, our culinary establishments seeing an increase in foot traffic, an increase in the number of patrons coming through there. I think the other part too is looking at the retail community of a particular area, right? Is the retail community seeing an uptick? Another area that we like to focus on too is transportation. If rideshare programs seeing additional rides, is the airport seeing additional influx? What is CTA looking like? CTA obviously keeps track on those particular stations. So calculating economic impact is an incredibly detailed sort of process that has to look at a lot of different factors. I think when we're talking about a community, when we're talking about a neighborhood, maybe outside of downtown, I think it's really important that the Chamber of Commerce or that the local business community is involved in that discussion as well, because I think the local business community, they certainly know their numbers, right? So I think looking at what that impact is, and hopefully it's positive, right? I mean, you hope that a really well-run event or festival that lands in a neighborhood indicates a positive economic impact and a positive social impact for a particular community.
This week of all things summer festivals is brought to you by Revolution Brewing. That's because the folks over at Revolution know that Chicago shows up and shows out for their city in the summer, so the beer should too. Revolution Brewing is Illinois' largest independent craft brewery, born right here in Chicago. From their Hero IPAs to their Freedom Sours to their Cold Time Lager, everything is brewed locally. So grabbing a Chicago beer or two, maybe even three at a Chicago Summer Festival, I think it just makes sense if you ask me. Catch Revolution Brewing at your favorite festival or beer store and learn more at revbrew.com. That's REVbrew.com. In the past few years, fest organizers have talked a lot about rising costs of throwing these festivals and how they're not necessarily always seeing a return on investment. Can we talk a little bit about why costs are rising? I think of an example from a Block Club report last year. Organizers for the Square Roots Festival in Lincoln Square say, they're paying $75K for music talent, $20K for security, $8K for EMT, at Hyde Park, the Silver Room Block Party, the Hyde Park Fest are not coming back this summer. What's contributing to these rising costs?
There's a lot of demand, right? I mean, there are a lot of festivals that are out there. From the consumer perspective, there's a lot more choices than there were even 10 years ago, 20, certainly 30 years ago, 40 years ago, there were nowhere near the amount of festivals and events that take place in Chicago, right? So the consumer in and of itself has a lot of options. Secondly, I think, the events require a lot of people. Events require a lot of labor. To do an event well requires a lot of people to be involved in that. And as labor rates rise, right, and that sort of thing, you are looking at increased costs for sure. When we're talking about artists, I think there's a couple factors there. Number one, artist live appearances are really the bread and butter, right? These moments where artists can feature or host a concert live in front of an audience is how they're making money. And so these appearances and concerts and such are really what contribute to some of those rising costs. And I mean, the other side of it too is that maybe artists weren't being paid as much as they should have been in the past, where it's like, oh, maybe they should just do it for the publicity or just do it to create awareness. Well, awareness doesn't put food on the table, right?
Exactly.
So, really looking at artists as being maybe these increased rates are actually just right-sizing what should have been in the first place. I also think the consumer, to be honest with you, Jacoby, now that we're talking through this, the consumer expects a higher level of, their expectations for an event or festival are also increased, right?
No, that's true. I definitely walk through with I'm there to enjoy myself. I try and give my little suggested $10 when I can, right. Which we're going to talk about that in a little bit. But I definitely, like you said, because of the number of options, I am wondering before I go in, where else could I be spending my time? Where else could I be going this weekend?
Right. And I think the, producers have this, consistently have to raise the bar. To a certain extent, I do think it's healthy that producers are aiming or aspiring to produce at a higher level for the consumers, so that their experiences are memorable, their experiences are safe, their experiences are really top notch, right? But in that, as you pointed out, this stuff costs money, and it costs more money to continue to achieve or produce at a higher level.
Are festivals, because they're trying to produce at a higher level, are they getting too big? Like Hyde Park Summerfest, when it was Brewfest on 53rd Street, it was packed, and it obviously needed more space, and we wanted it to grow. But then it became Hyde Park Summerfest, and you went out there last year, and just not that many people out there, and it was clear how much money was put into it. What are your thoughts on festivals getting too big, and also because of competing with others, does that price out people who just want to put on maybe lower cost street festivals?
Yeah, so, I think of it like a restaurant, right? Have you ever experienced a restaurant? You find this really awesome restaurant, and you're like, oh, it seats maybe 30, 40 people. And you're like, this place is great. It's a really small neighborhood establishment. They've got really good food. And then they expand, right? And again, if you're not growing audience at the same rate that you're growing your space, it's possible, right, that you may have gotten too big may have gotten too big at that point, right? You're taking on more than you can. You get too much space, you might have the same number of people, but with too much space, it seems like, is this really successful? It seems like there's not as many people here. Might be the same number of people. But then, when you have a really small space and you frankly say sold out or, unable to, fit anymore, that creates a real desire, right? Like, oh man, look at all these people in there. I wish I could have gotten in. Should have gotten my tickets earlier. And I think producers really have to play that game strategic before you expand. Is there really the demand? And will that serve your event or festival best? I mean, the other thing, too, to consider in this discussion, Jacoby, is the risk, right? I mean, successful events, 76 degrees sunny, no humidity is the best recipe for a successful outdoor event. You know what the number one thing you can't control as a producer? 76 degrees sunny, no humidity at a festival, right? And so I say to people all the time, good weather sometimes covers up all your mistakes. And frankly, inclement weather does a good job of really just bringing out everything that needs to be done differently.
Yeah. I mean, generally these street festivals are supposed to be donation based, so you don't have to pay to get in. But, your department fielded a lot of complaints last year about fest organizers who were particularly aggressive in getting those donations, or whose websites maybe had misleading information about tickets. And then when you listen to this conversation about how much everything costs, you don't want to sort of be told that you have to pay when you don't have to, but you also understand where organizers are coming from. Like, are you seeing similar complaints this year? And how do we balance that, need to sort of recoup some of this investment, but also not pushing up on folks?
Yeah, I think there's a couple ways to look at that. I mean, you're right. It's an optional donation, and nobody wants. Please, everybody raise their hand that's listening that wants to give away their money. I don't think too many hands are in the air at this point, right? But that said, you want to see if you're going to go to that event and you're going to invest your dollars, whether that's in food and beverage or whatever else is there supporting some of the vendors or whatever it is, you want to be part of a nice festival. You want to see a well done event that allows you to feel safe, that delivers some really great and interesting performances, has unique vendors, and can offer some culinary surprises for you that surprise and delight. But again, like you said, that all costs money.
Are organizers putting any pressure on like the city to take that like donation system off the table where they can just charge people straight up? Like if they reach a threshold of like, we invested this much, it's gotten this big, sort of suggested donation is no longer feasible.
Yeah, just being honest with Jacoby, I don't know if those conversations are taking place or if they are coming in at any sort of a pace that might be different than previous years. I will say that typically those discussions start to really roll in once you're on the other side of summer, right? Like as you're kind of ending summer, getting towards the fall, and you're really having these recap discussions or these wrap-up meetings with organizers. That's when some of those discussions become front and center because you really have to evaluate where you're at in that process. I mean, if your organization or your event or festival did really well at that gate and people were being generous and willing to just throw their $5-10 in the hat, you that particular year, you may not even bring the issue up. If your event had inclement weather and the numbers were down and people were kind of on the fence about throwing money in that hat as they walked in the door, you could see that, organizers looking for a little bit more of a consistent stream of revenue, why they would want to have that discussion.
What kind of resources does DCASE provide to organizers, people who are interested in throwing a street festival or an event in their neighborhood?
Yeah, so I mean, one of the big things that our Director of Special Event Permitting, Yesenia Mota, has worked on this past year is really offering a lot more in the way of webinars, seminars, and discussions that are taking place and recorded for the DCASE website in order to support the filing of the special event permit application, being able to offer tips and tricks sort of in a different language. It's a bilingual program, just making sure that there are resources so that organizers aren't necessarily put off by the process of, I've got to file for a permit. The other thing that the Department of Culture Affairs and Special Events does is there are several grant programs through the department that different organizations can apply for grants to support the production of a particular event in their neighborhood. The grants team also works to create awareness and some tutorials that really just help people understand that there are resources out there to get lifted off the ground. Because producing an event can often be a challenging endeavor. I mean, I think sometimes it is made to look like it's cigs and martinis, like, just throw a party. This is a real easy thing to do. But oftentimes there's a lot more steps that are involved until you get to that final product.
This year marks the 5th Summertime Shy since summertime lockdown. What has the recovery looked like in your office and across the city?
Yeah, so what I can give you is an anecdotal sort of answer to that is that, there has been a lot more, right? A lot more, let's get out there, let's do it, let's have that event, let's host that event. But to our earlier discussion, right, the costs have significantly increased in that last 5 years. I mean, the labor costs alone have gone up in all the sectors, right? Not just event production. Really finding enough people to support security, to support maintenance, to support vendors, food vendors especially. We're having a hard time recruiting enough staff and labor to be part of those festivals and events. So while I think there was a real appetite to produce more and to put out more and to get people engaged and excited. I also think there were some limitations. It does certainly feel like there is a lot more and a lot more reason to party, frankly, right? I mean, we were locked down for a couple summers. I mean, that in and of itself is pent up.
Yeah, throwing all of those things in the bowl, increased demand, increased cost, the increased number of festivals. Do you think we're heading for a festival cliff where there are just too many things to do, but not enough maybe people, money, resources, labor to go around to make it all happen? Again, I've already seen some of my favorite summertime festivals closed, and it was, heartbreaking in one because I knew it was happening, and heartbreaking in another because it just sort of was a shock when it was announced. Are we headed for a festival cliff?
So I would say that there's maybe a festival pivot, right? Because as these festivals see really significant increased costs and increased saturation in particular areas, is it going to be worth it? Part of the discussion then has to be, what's the objective of the event, right? If the objective of the event is to make money and the event is not making money, then it's easy to see where that's going to go. But I think as you start to talk about, are the objectives solely about the money, or are there other objectives that can be measured, or are there other objectives in place that help to align or decide if that event or festival should continue? Are there a lot of events in the city? Absolutely. Is it an opportunity to maybe party on Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday night? Maybe. The pivot, right? What's the pivot? We have certainly seen there is an increased appetite for some of these night markets that have popped up in communities, right? If you remember years ago, a farmer's market was like a very Saturday morning thing to do, or a Sunday morning thing to do. And now it's like you see a Thursday night market, or a Tuesday night market, which are awesome, right? I mean, these are awesome when you have the right lighting and the right energy and the right vendors. That could create a really great experience for people. So I think that there is, while yes, it is always sad, much like television, right? You're sad to see your show end. I think the second side of that is that there's always something new to come. There will be another event or festival that you come to know and love. There will be another opportunity to do something different or experience something that is not what you had experienced before, or similar enough that you can then find some love in that.
Neil Heitz is the Director of Event Production for the Chicago Department of Cultural Affairs and Special Events. Neil, thank you so much for making time for CityCast Chicago today.
Thank you, Jacoby. It was absolutely a pleasure speaking with you today.
A quick note, DCASE has been a sponsor of CityCast Chicago. For more news and headlines, head to our website, chicago.citycast.fm. And while you're there, subscribe to our daily newsletter, Hey Chicago. Of course, I got some good news for you. Tonight, I'm pulling up to Schuba's for the Metal Gear concert featuring Galaxy Francis, Jay Bambi, Manessi, and others. The ticket link is for you in the show notes. I'ma see you there. As always, we appreciate you for listening and reading. We're going to be back bright and early tomorrow covering all things food festivals. We'll talk to you then. Peace.